And Megan's pulling up her slides, which is great. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started with today's presentation and webinar, is that we will have Q&A, and we ask that you type any questions or comments in the chat or the Q&A for participation, but then at the end of the webinar, we'll break for Q&A. Megan has been open to taking questions live, so you can feel free to raise your Zoom hand and I can unmute you. So since we are on Zoom webinar, you don't have the capability to unmute yourself or turn on your camera, but I can unmute you and give you that capability back whenever we have that time for live Q&A. We will have the slide deck, or we already have the slide deck available for you today, so I'll put that in the chat momentarily. And then today's session is being recorded, so we will have that recording available for you as well. Tomorrow, you'll receive a follow-up email that will have the recording, the presentation, and the URL where all of that is housed, as well as a follow-up survey, and we ask for your participation for that follow-up survey. I am a part of the WIO Professional Development Committee, and so we welcome that survey feedback, and we do look at it and use it to provide and edit and kind of tweak future professional development. This session actually was born out of one of those surveys. We had a request for this session on one of our follow-up surveys. So we're happy to provide this session to the field. And hopefully those of you who are on today, we have a smaller audience, finds it relevant to learn about the PaCE program. And so what else do we need to say? We also have closed captioning on for accessibility reasons and note-taking purposes. So feel free to use that as well. Megan, you can go to the next slide for me. Again, my name is Kirsten Bayer. I'm the Assistant Director of Communications at ICSPS. If you've ever joined a Workforce Wednesday webinar before, you've probably heard my voice. Megan, you can go to the next slide for me. Thank you. So we'll do our beginning polls that we do every Workforce Wednesday webinar for the WIO Professional Development Committee's analytical purposes. So if you could tell us where your local area is that you're joining us from today. We've separated this state by kind of regions. So Chicago, North, Central, or Southern Illinois, or if you're joining us from statewide. And then if you could tell us which title you best represent, or if you best represent another WIO partner or stakeholder. And we'll give everyone about 30 to 45 seconds to answer both of those polls. You should be able to scroll. And Megan, you can go to the next slide because that's just for the second poll there. Couple more seconds and then I'll end that poll. Okay, so it looks like a lot of you are joining, or one person from Chicago, one person from Central Illinois, and one person from Southern Illinois. So we have a good span across the state, even though we have a smaller audience. So welcome. Thank you for spending your morning with us. And then a couple of people from Title I and other WIO partners and stakeholders as well. So thank you for joining us this morning. Hopefully you find this information relevant. And if you have any coworkers who could benefit from this information, again, this session will be recorded so we can share it with them. So I'll hand it off to Megan to start the presentation, and then I will be here for Q&A and to help facilitation.
Great. Thanks so much, Kirsten. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Crum, and I am a professional development specialist with the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, or ISAC. And so for those of you who are not aware of who ISAC is, we are the state's financial aid agency. And so we administer all of the MAP grant funding to colleges. We also administer several of our scholarship and grant programs here across the state. And we do that, and our big kind of like way that we do this is through this professional development offering of helping students in Illinois to provide them with information and assistance about their education beyond high school. But to also know that it is accessible and affordable. And so we do that through this professional development. And so one of that is through PaCE, as we'll talk about today, or the post-secondary and career expectations. I'm going to give an overview of some background and everything, but ISAC is the lead agency that handles the implementation of PaCE, not just in terms of we do work with the State Board of Education and the Community College Board and the Board of Higher Education in other capacities as well. But ISAC is the lead agency on PaCE. So I'm going to talk about some background legislation today, getting how to, especially for those of you who maybe help high schools or work with high school students or students who are adult learners, and maybe they have children that are in high school, how their schools can get started with PaCE. And if they have a PaCE framework, what does that mean? The PaCE implementation process, and then resources and support options that schools can request for and organizations can request from us to have support. So just kind of this legislation overview. So all the way back in May of 2016, the House and the Senate of Illinois passed the Postsecondary and Workforce Readiness Act, or the PWR Act. Some people call it the Power Act. A lot of the times I will say just the PWR Act. And so what that did is it created 4 components of the act, and PaCE is one of them. And what it did was that it established that the 4 education agencies come together, which is ISAC, the Board of Higher Education, the Community College Board, and the State Board of Education, establish a system to ensure that students are college and career ready. And so all that happened. So they had a year to design a framework to say, what does it mean for students across the state of Illinois to be college and career ready, or post-secondary and career ready? And so they had July of 2017 to do that. And so in July of 2017, they outlined what their framework looked like. And that is now what we know today as the Illinois PaCE framework. And so for the last 5 years or so, the PaCE framework has hung out. It's been here. It's not a back then it was not a mandate for schools to do, but schools, high schools and organizations across the state had the choice to say, we want a way to document our processes for our students to know what does it mean that we want our students to have done or completed by their end of their 12th grade to be college and career ready. And so back just last year in May of 22, the Public Act 1020917 was signed by Governor Pritzker. And what the law does for that, the Public Act, is that it actually builds upon the main PWR Act originally, with a focus on PaCE and college and career pathway endorsements, which is another component of the original PWR Act. And so that law that was passed in May of 22 again made this had the 4 state education agencies come together and actually go through the PaCE framework again and update it. But it also established that it would be extended from 6 through 12 rather than 8 through 12. So the original PaCE framework only went from 8 through 12, and then the new law passed in May of 22 extended it down to 6th grade. So as I mentioned, there are 4 components of the PWR Act. PaCE is one of the biggest. ISAC is the lead agency for that, as I mentioned. There's also college and career pathway endorsements, or CCPEs. This happens a lot at the high schools. Not every high school will offer this endorsement area. A lot of this deals with work-based learning, team-based challenges. It's looking at the work-based learning continuum and those experiences that fall within that. There's also transitional instruction, so that falls under math and English. Math was the first to be implemented, and then due to the success of transitional math, they implemented transitional English. And then lastly, there is the competency-based education pilot. So while ISAC is the lead agency for PaCE, the State Board of Education, the Community College, the Illinois Community College Board, and the Illinois Board of Higher Education handle the other 3. Even though, yes, we're aware of the CCPEs and we support schools through this process of what does it mean to have a CCPEs, in that case, we can still support schools, but we're going to refer them back to the state the State Board of Education at that point. So as I mentioned, that new law that was signed back in May of 22, it did become effective back in January 1 of this year. And so it does a few things for schools. Now this is specific to secondary education. So it's high schools. It doesn't involve higher education communities, but it does affect where they land. And so if the students if you're a business, or if you're someone who works, say, for the community college or works with the ROE, the Regional Offices of Education, in this PaCE, it's this place of how do you build these connections between the higher education institutions and what the high schools are doing. And so as I mentioned, the new law, the Public Act, did build upon that original PWR Act with that focus on the Illinois PaCE framework and the college and career pathway endorsements, but it also does amend the school code for the Illinois public high schools, so everywhere else in the state, and the Chicago public schools. So what does this mean? What does the law do? How does this work? So the first thing that the law tasked was that the education agencies come back together, the four of us come back together and update and adopt and publicize the updated version of the Illinois PaCE framework that now extends to 6th grade. And we had to do that by July 1 of 2023, and we've done that. And so on our website, on ISAC's website, we have both the high school framework that runs from 9th through 12th, as well as the 6th through 8th grade framework that was created from scratch. We use curriculum that we have from the Illinois Gear Up program that we have the grant for, and that's what we use to create the 6th through 8th grade framework. And so that's completed, that has been done. Now, what's going to happen is that the State Board of Education has some other things that they have to do by July 1 of 24. So they have to publish and maintain a current database by the region of employer champions for work-based learning and career readiness programs. And then they have to publish and maintain an inventory of resources available for schools and districts who would implement college and career pathway endorsements, or those CCPEs. But in terms of PaCE, the law also required now that PaCE become a mandate. And so it means that Chicago Public Schools, as well as any other school district in the state, is now required to start adopting or customizing an Illinois PaCE framework, or have their own customized framework, or they choose to opt out. I'm going to talk about what that means for all three. So for Chicago Public Schools, they have by July 1 of 2024 to adopt or customize their framework and then commence implementation for a framework from 6th through 12th grade. And so what that means of commence implementation, it means start doing the activities that they have for their benchmark. So on the Illinois PaCE framework, we call the things that students should have completed as benchmarks. And so this is just for Chicago Public Schools. Okay, this is that deadline just for them. And so what also that means is by July 1 of 2024, the CPS framework, now this is not, say, district-wide for CPS. Each school has the choice to do their own thing, especially if they're part of a Noble school or one of the charter schools. They have the choice to do their own, but because CPS is such a large school district, they may choose to implement a district-wide framework. But what that means, though, is that the CPS framework, or each individual school's framework, has to be prominently displayed on their district's website. So it can't just be like put behind like several pages where you have to go really digging for it. And so it needs to be prominently displayed, so that if you as yourselves, or if you're a parent yourselves in your high school that your student is at, has a PaCE framework, you need to be able to find that right off the bat, rather than like, where would I go for this? Now for everyone else, so this includes the rest of the state except for CPS, right? So CPS has a deadline of July 1 of 2024, and then everyone else has a deadline of July 1 of 2025. And so that means that they have, so I'm here in Central Illinois, I'm in Peoria. So that means all of the Peoria public schools, as well as the other surrounding districts in the greater Peoria area, as a public high school. Private high schools don't have to do this. It's the public high schools that are required to do this. And so they have to either adopt or customize the framework and then commence implementation of their activities for their PaCE framework for 6th through 12th grade. Similar to CPS, the rest of the school districts do have to display their completed, their finalized framework on their location. And then here's this last thing, it's that every school district except for CPS by July 1 of 2025 that serves grades 9 through 12. So say you're just a high school district that you work with, or they must have elected to either implement CCPEs, those college and career pathway endorsements, or have opted out of them. So what does this mean for schools? So for CPS, these college and career pathway endorsements, which again really consist of work-based learning, these team-based challenges, it's an endorsement in a specific area. So some schools have endorsements in education, some have endorsements in IT, some it's in healthcare. It depends on the school and what they do for their endorsement. But for CPS, they have to start electing to implement at least one by the class of 26. And then as you see on your screen, it goes up from there. And then for everyone else outside of CPS, they have until the class of 27 that they have to offer at least one. And then as they move on, right, they have until 2031. So while 2031 seems quite a far time for now, these endorsements happen through the State Board of Education, and it is an application process. And the state board does go through the application and often will provide a lot of feedback. So here in Peoria, the greater Peoria area is the 7 schools that are in the greater Peoria area are all electing to do the same endorsement area for their CNA program that we have here at Illinois Central College, which is our community college, but they submitted their application for CCPEs last fall. And they didn't get feedback till the spring. And so this is a long-term process. This is not something that's going to take only 6 weeks. So for those of you who work with schools, of high schools specifically, this is what that looks like. Now, how do we kind of roll all this together, right? So for schools that choose to implement a PaCE framework, so they I think I'm missing, oh, there it is, that are choosing to implement a PaCE framework, what's going to happen is all of this rolls together through the other programs that the state has. So on your left side of your screen, you'll see it says the PaCE element. So all of the benchmarks that you see on your screen are benchmarks from certain pieces of the framework that support other areas that are happening in college and career readiness work. So the State Board of Education does have what are called CCRIs, or the College and Career Readiness Indicators. And then there's also, as you see on the right side of your screen, the CCPEs, so those pathway endorsements. So we really kind of work with high schools and districts to understand that if you adopt or customize your own PaCE framework and have these specific benchmarks, you are supporting other areas that are designated for you. So such as the pathway endorsements, the CCRIs, which comes out of the state's ESSA plan, which was the No Child Left Behind at one point. But the CCRIs is handled by the State Board of Education, but know that they work in conjunction. That's the biggest piece of this slide. A school does, though, have a choice to opt out. And so what that means is they have a choice to opt out in either all or part of the law. So meaning parts of the law, like if they really like PaCE, but they're not able to offer the college and career pathway endorsements because of, say, resources, they don't have enough teachers, X, Y, Z, they can, the school has to take that to their school board. So a school board can choose to say, yep, we want to do PaCE, but not the CCPEs. Or they could choose not to do any of it, or they could choose to say, yep, we're going to do both. But if they choose to opt out of a piece of it, it's not just a teacher or somebody like a school counselor who is making that decision. The decision has to be, this has to be shown to the school board. The school board has to make the decision and give one of the following reasons. So I'm not going to read all that through, but one of the biggest thing is that Dual Credit Quality Act, through the Community College Board, right, about the willingness and the availability to offer dual credit from the high schools and the community colleges. So that's probably the biggest piece there. But it's also like there may be a school that already feels that they have a really good system, like and a current system for their college and career readiness. They're like, we don't feel like we need this, or we're already doing a lot of this work. But what's going to happen is that the school board has to make that decision, and then the school board reports that to ISB. So that was one law. The other law that was passed last year was passed in March, and it is the House Resolution 681. And so what it does, and it became effective immediately. And so what it does is it means that ISAC has certain things that we have to do, the State Board of Education does, as well as the both of us. So first for ISAC, we have to start annually reporting and recognizing the leadership of districts who implement a PaCE framework. Some of that work's already been done because we have a whole web page dedicated to who has adopted a framework or who is customized, and I'll show you that later. As I mentioned, has to start recognizing that they have to do that workforce by employer. They have to show by the region of the list of employers, but additionally they have to also start recognizing the leadership of schools that have CCPEs. And then they have to encourage all districts to have their, if they're just a high school serving district, to implement the college and career pathway endorsements, but then work with their collaboration of businesses, their employers, and post-secondary and workforce partners to implement that. And then both agencies are tasked with to make sure that, hey, people are aware of what's happening with the law, and what now schools are required to do. And this is the one way that we do that, is through this. And then we are encouraged to speak with many schools across the state, if not all of them, to encourage that if they already have a PaCE framework, say from 8 through 12, to extend it down to 6th grade. So that was the fun part. I'm a big law person. So now we're going to really get into how do schools kind of get started with PaCE. So it's important to know that this work actually happens all over the state. And so it's not just say in the Chicagoland area or just up there. This work happens, as you can see on your screen, this heat map. This happens all the way down here, down in Vienna, where it's at the bottom of the state, okay, very bottom, down in Shawnee, which is Shawnee and whatnot. And so, but you'll see that it's spread across the entire state. So the green that you see on the screen is schools who have chosen to customize their frameworks, their own PaCE framework. The orange is school districts that have chosen to adopt just the Illinois PaCE framework as is, and I'll show you what that looks like. But overall, from just this past spring, we have identified over 140 schools and districts who have implemented a PaCE framework. And that's what you see on your screen for the heat map. 94 of them have customized their own PaCE framework, 26 with the help of ISAC. So that is something we can help facilitate. But then 54 schools across the state have just adopted the Illinois PaCE framework as is. So what does a framework really provide a school and a district? It is a way to document their efforts. So in this case, say you are working with a high school, or you are a parent of a high school student, or you work with the ROE, and someone new comes in and wants to establish this partnership or continue a partnership with the school. And they can ask, say, hey, does your school have a PaCE framework, right? And if they say yes, great. This is those things that the school wants every student by the end of a specific grade level to have completed, to know that they are college and career ready. So really, that the first piece of the framework really provides that sustainability. It's so that these activities that you're doing for their school happens from year to year, but the PaCE framework really gives this way of saying, yes, this is what we do from year to year. Schools do a lot of great things. They sometimes just don't have it documented of what they do from year to year. Somebody knows it in a different department. That's what happens in the spring. This is what happens in the fall. But the PaCE framework lays that all out so everyone can see what happens. It also is that accountability piece, so that it's not just the principal's job to do this. It's not just the school counselors. It is everyone in the building is to be held accountable, to help make students college and career ready. So whether that means going straight into the workforce, with such as resume writing, or understanding what does it mean to complete a FAFSA, that, hey, this is information that you also should know because your students may connect with you and they have questions about it. And then it's that flexibility of a framework. As I mentioned, a school does have the option to just adopt the Illinois PaCE framework as is, or they have the choice to customize their framework to set up and make sure that the benchmarks reflected on their framework meet the needs of their student population. So this is the updated PaCE framework as it is today. So I'm not going to show you the old one since we've taken it off and everything, but this is the updated one. This is the high school, and so it does run 9th through 12th, as I've said. When the update happened, there was not a lot actually updated. And what I mean by that is that certain benchmarks were reworded. And there are certain benchmarks, so such as I know it's kind of small on your screen, but it says explore opportunities along the work-based learning continuum benchmark here in 10th grade. That was a benchmark that was not there originally, but it was added when the update happened. But many of the benchmarks that you see on your screen were already on the original PaCE framework, and they have stayed there. So what are those components of the high school framework? So as I mentioned, the readoption of the update happened back in July 1 of this year, and the framework runs 9th through 12th grade. And then, but also what you'll see on the framework is that you'll see these three things. So a student should be supported to, a student should know, and a student should have. So the first two that you'll see that students should be supported to and a student should know are found in every single grade level, okay, from 9 through 12. And so the supported to piece is that these are action items or experiences such as activities that they are getting to do. So such as, one example is a student should be supported to complete a resume writing workshop. That is an activity that needs to be done. But the student should know piece is that concept. So such as one example in 10th grade is understanding employability skills. That is a concept. What does it mean to have an employability skills? What are employability skills, or what I don't call them soft skills anymore. In workforce, I know in other parts of the workforce I'm in that they don't call them soft skills anymore. But what does that mean for students to, maybe they've never heard it that way, of like, well, what are employability skills? And then a student should have is this piece that's only found in 12th grade. And these are time-sensitive tasks. So these are tasks such as completing a financial aid application, it's completing their admissions applications, maybe it's completing a job application, or such, especially say if they're enrolling in a trade or a vocational school. Sometimes, those students can't apply for that until they're 18. And so if there's a deadline attached to that, what does that mean for that student? And then the biggest piece of the PaCE framework is these domains, this Venn diagram that you see on your screen. And so the framework is broken out into 3 different domains. So career exploration and development, financial aid and literacy, and post-secondary education, exploration, preparation, and selection. We just call the domains here at ISAC just the career domain, the financial aid domain, and the post-secondary domain, especially because post-secondary is a little bit of a long name. But they're color coordinated, as you saw on the previous screen here. So all of the career domain benchmarks are the yellow bullet points, the green are the post-secondary, and red are in the financial literacy piece. So this is the middle school framework that was created. And so what we did use here at ISAC, we worked with the other agencies, is we used our Illinois Gear Up curriculum that we have. So we do have that federal grant for a Gear Up program. And so we used our curriculum that runs from 6th through 8th grade. And that is how these benchmarks work. That's what inspired the benchmarks and led through this process. And so this is the framework in its entirety. And so you'll notice 8th grade's a little bit longer, and that's because some of the benchmarks that were found in the 8th grade section of the original PaCE framework, we moved over to the middle school framework. And so similar to the high school way, we have these components. So this was adopted back in July 1. And so as I mentioned, we use the Illinois Gear Up program. It runs through 6th through 8th, and that piece is it's by the end of. Especially for the high school as well, is that it's by the end of that grade level. Schools have the choice, say, well, we focus this really in this semester. That's great. As long as it's by the end of that year, it gives the school time to say when these things happen. So the 2 things that are on the middle school framework that are different than the high school framework, one is the student should pieces. So the student should be supported to, and the student should be exposed to. So these are things that, again, supported to are activities that need to be done. Exposed to is such in this case is as you'll see, like in 6th grade, be exposed to information about examples of a wide range of careers. It's just knowing that, hey, these things do happen for them. What does it mean? And schools will ask us, well, what does it mean to be exposed to, right? Are you doing some sort of activity, maybe it's a career fair? For here in Illinois, in Central Illinois, we have the Career Spark, which is run through junior achievement, right? But the school also has the discussion of what does it mean to be exposed to. So similar to the high school, the middle school framework does have the domains. And so it has the aspiration planning and self-advocacy. Again, they're color coordinated based on that for the bullet points on the previous screen. And so this is we call the Illinois PaCE framework as an umbrella, but there are 2 frameworks underneath the Illinois PaCE framework, and that's the middle school and high school frameworks. So as we really advise high schools who start this process, is to decide which framework they're going to do. Okay, are they going to just adopt the Illinois PaCE framework as is, which is what you see on the left side of your screen, or are they going to customize their own framework? Okay, so if you are working with high schools, or again, say you're a parent of a high schooler and they have a customized framework, it means that they have gone through this process of deciding what they want on their framework, but which benchmarks they want and what they want their students to know by the end of those grade levels. And so the right side of your screen, as you see, that's just the template that we have here at ISAC that schools can use. But this is the first step, is to decide for schools and districts if either they adopt or they customize. We always recommend starting with the review of the Illinois PaCE framework, the high school framework, similar to the middle school. Is decide, look at that first, decide, okay, this fits our needs, we feel like we could do this, cool. But if not, what does that mean? Then does that mean you go into a customized framework? So when schools are reviewing the high school framework and the middle school framework, we do recommend that they talk to their administration, talk to the ROE if they want, talk to other departments and either gain support and or approval. It's not required by ISAC or the state or the law itself that says you have to get approval from the administration, but it's something to be kept in mind. I think the biggest two things here are the available resources and the partnerships within the community. So when we talk about available resources, we really talk about with schools of where are you at in terms of, are you more urban? Are you rural? How far are your students traveling, right? If there's not a resource within your, say, in district community, and say they're having to travel to another county for a resource, what does that look like for them, right? How are you partnering with employers? And if you're not, what's happening, right? And so that partnership within the community is the one way. So we worked with Shawnee High School, and they customized their framework, but they looked at one thing that they had a challenge with was parent engagement. And they're like, we're not sure how to increase our parent engagement. And so when we talked with them, we said, is there another place that you could host some sort of thing for parents and students? And they, the brains started working and their reels were turning, and they said, well, we could use our community center. They had a relationship with their community center already, but it was small. It wasn't a large partnership between the two of them. And so that was one way that they had come together in their group to say, you know what, we want to build that partnership bigger. And so if we could start hosting things there, that may take the stigma around of the parents coming to the high school, and rather they meet them at the community center there, which maybe is more centrally located for those families. So after a school looks at the Illinois PaCE framework for the high school or the middle school, and they say, you know what, this is great, but it doesn't meet everything that we need. So the school then can decide if they go there to customize. And so similar you saw on the previous screen, we do still recommend that schools review, having administrative support or approval, their resources, the needs of the student population, but also this last piece of who should or / needs to be involved in the development of their framework. So this often we will see it's the high school themselves that will do this. So it's teachers from different departments, as well as the administration. Often though, we don't see, say, employers at this stage quite yet, or say someone from your sector. We will see your sector and employers come in once the framework's designed. But if you're like, hey, I want to be involved in this, maybe because you do have a really close relationship with your schools, then certainly offer that up. But schools, the schools and districts can choose to do it on their own, or they can choose to do it with us, and we can facilitate that process. So as I mentioned, that when we see who in that development of the framework, who consists of it, it really we see the counseling staff, the administration, teachers from different departments, especially if they're going to be customizing the middle school framework, including someone from 8th grade, including someone from their junior high in those conversations, because they know what they're doing. Maybe it's the middle school principal, right? Maybe it is the middle school counselor if they have one. But it's really making sure in this development of their framework, it's that consensus is reached of what does everyone think about having certain benchmarks be included, and where by the end of which grade level does that make sense for their school. So now I'm going to move into implementation. What's going to happen is that how we advise schools to start this process, that implementation is a marathon and not a sprint. Okay. Implementation is a marathon and not a sprint. This is not going to happen in 6 months. This is not going to happen in 8 months, right? Or even in 3 months. Like, this is not meant to be a short-term process. It is a long-term goal when we advise schools to do this. And so implementation, literally, it looks at their strengths, their weaknesses, their implementation that they already have going on, and where their gaps are. And we're going to talk about that. So what's going to happen is, when the implementation team may look different than the framework development team. And that's because the folks who are on the framework development team may be, say, in the math department, the English department, and the science department, but and say they're department chairs, where the implementation team are actually those teachers doing the activities. But this is also where we see the employers come into play, as well as other community partners come in to say, hey, how can we support you especially if it's like a job shadowing thing, or if it's an opportunity to partner with the CTE program, so that the career and technical education piece. Where do you all fit into that, and with the schools that you serve or work with, especially if it's, say, the community college? How are those community colleges partnering with the high school? So we have developed a 3-step process, and so step 1 is taking an inventory. Step 2 is prioritizing those gaps that you identified from step 1, and then step 3 is action planning. And so with step 1, we advise schools to say, let's look at every single benchmark that is on your framework. And it's saying, okay, where are your strengths and weaknesses? What benchmarks are you feel are currently being met? Okay. Which benchmarks of those are being met? How well are they being met? How effective are they? It's really looking at the data that the school has. It's looking at, how do you know that that's getting done? But which benchmarks do they feel that they need improvement on? And so when we look at this, I like to tell schools that we do a lot of the legwork for them. So they do a lot of great work, but we have these documents and these resources built for them already, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so this is the worksheet for step 1 that we've designed. And so we're actually updating them right now, because this still has the 8th grade piece on it. So we'll have worksheets for the middle school and high school. And so these are the PaCE worksheets. We do have customized worksheets as well. But what they'll do actually is we will take them through implementation support of going through every single benchmark. And we ask them to rate the benchmark, to say, okay, how many percentages of their students do they believe are being either support and meeting the benchmark? So on your screen here, you'll see the first one you'll see is that post-secondary. And so say it's attend a college fair. A lot of the times we'll ask schools, say, okay, if you have that as a benchmark, how do you know that the student attended a college fair? And if they don't take them to visiting a college, this is maybe something that happens outside of the school day. Even though there are cases that we've worked with schools that do host college and career fairs during the school day to meet that benchmark, but some schools don't have those resources to do that. So how do you know that they've attended a college fair? And that's what we look at measurement. How do you assess that that's happening? Do you ask for them to bring something back? Do you ask them when they do their senior interview, right? Hey, have they done this yet? And it's looking at, do you believe that, say, you give it a degree of completion of 3, of meaning 51 to 75% of your students are being supported in meeting the benchmark. Now, for some benchmarks, the 5 is 100%. Some benchmarks may have 5s. Maybe it's, yes, every senior, right, or every junior will complete a resume, right? And they do that in, say, business class or in math class, right, or in English. But some benchmarks are not going to all be 5s, and that's okay. And that's what we tell schools of, hey, 3, if your pie in the sky is 3 is it, okay? 3 is where you want to be, because that means majority of your student population. So from there, what schools will do is that they're going to look at those gaps. So any of the rankings that they gave, either 1s or 2s, that's where they'll start and say, okay, these are the gaps we've identified. what are we currently doing for them, if anything? And then what are things that we can do? So these potential activities, one, to improve a benchmark if something's already being done, or an activity for that benchmark, there's nothing currently in place. So again, we've developed these worksheets already for them to do. So again, we have these things that, this is that legwork. We built these things for them so that they just have to enter the information. So in this case, of this example, so one school had that the benchmark was to attend a financial aid award letter workshop. This is the benchmark that they wanted to improve upon. They do have a current activity, and that was meaning that they offer an after school award letter workshop hosted in the school library during the spring semester. And their current partner was their counselor. But they said, you know what, we want to improve upon this. We really want to make sure our students know to make an informed decision for their award letters and where they're going to enroll in school. So they said that they're going to actually offer multiple award letter workshops during that student's spring semester of that 12th grade. And then they're going to schedule and advertise workshop dates before winter break. And their potential partners are counseling staff and ISAC core members. And so with this, what's going to happen is that is how they wrote it out, is they're saying, yes, this is what they want to do. This is how they're going to do it. But then step 3 is making sure everything that they just wrote out gets put into action. And that's what action planning does. And it's addressing the who, what, where, when, and why, basically. So we have another worksheet for them. And so they use the same benchmark and say, okay, now we're going to action plan for it. So they're going to say who's involved and what's their role. The counselor's involved. They're going to organize all of the workshops, but all counseling staff and someone from ISAC will attend those workshops to support their students. When is it going to take place? They were very specific on what dates and what time. And then where it will take place, right? It's going to be held in the school library. And then what are things that need to be done in order for preparation? So they need to reserve the space in the library, reach out to administration to set up an all call, and then secure someone from ISAC for each day. So the more specific schools get here, the better, especially if you are, it depends where your titles are and those things, of like, if they're reaching out to you to support them in this work, you may fall within this. Maybe you're not in the action planning here, developing the action plan, but you're saying, hey, if we can support you, how do we do that for you? How can we help you? Or if there's something already that you support them with, maybe it's a tweak that needs to be made. And that's one thing that we really look at schools to say, a small change makes a big impact. And so a really good example of this is when schools host a financial aid application completion workshop or a FAFSA workshop. We ask them, okay, when do you do it? Do you host it on a Monday versus a Thursday? Is it at 4 p.m. versus 6 p.m.? It's these small changes that make a larger impact for schools to say, okay, well, we want to increase our attendance. How do we do that? Is it changing the date? Is it changing the time? Is it offering during the day rather than in the evening, right? Do families have that flexibility to do that, to do it during the day rather than at nighttime? So as we wrap up here, I'm going to talk about some resources that we have. So this is our Illinois PaCE page. This is our website, and so you have the PowerPoint, the PDF, and all those links that you see at the bottom are active, so you'll be able to click on them. And so this is what our page, this is just the top half of that page, but it really goes into what is the descriptions of our support options. You'll see a right-hand menu in blue. You'll be able to see different customized framework examples, and that's probably my favorite page out of the whole PaCE thing, because we have shared schools that have customized their frameworks and what they look like and what they're doing. And so if schools are like, hey, we want to see an example of a school that is similar in size, but also similar in, say, demographic information, or if they're urban versus suburban, and rural, they want to see what other schools are doing. And so they have that option. So we also have the Illinois student checklist, the PaCE student checklist. And this is really more for students. Exactly. It is written in student-friendly language, and you'll see on the screen for 12th grade. It's the career, piece, the money piece, which is the financial literacy, and then the college, which is the post-secondary piece. And it'll tell them more of like, hey, for a 12th grade and career, it's like talk to your counselor to see if you need to take any additional math or English ELA classes or the English language arts to graduate, right? And so we have a checklist for 9th through 12th, and we're developing one from 6th through 8th. And so we have a lot of different resources for schools to do this work. Schools have the choice to submit a request to us for us to come out to them to either get a PaCE overview like we're doing today, have implementation support, get the facilitated process of the framework development. And then if it's just an individualized meeting, they can set that up with us too. So some of the high schools that I've worked with here, I'm actually meeting with a high school tomorrow down in Waverly, which is just right outside Springfield. And they have not started, they're getting ready to start, but they want to meet with ISAC first to see what are our options, where are we going from here. And so we do that too. I think we do really well at we're meeting the schools where they're at. If it means that they need this kind of conversation first before they dive head into this work, what are they doing? What does that process look like? And so we're here for every step of their way for them. So this is a really good resource that we developed back in October of 21. And so this really helps schools and districts understand how to implement PaCE and how to build that buy-in, but develop a plan for implementation. But it's also understanding what does it mean for employers? What does it mean for community partners to help do the implementation, activities that they could provide, how those partnerships could grow. Which then leads into, which is kind of this first step before they get to implementation, right, is they need to figure out if they're going to customize their framework or adopt their framework. And if they choose to customize, as I've said, they can choose to have a facilitated process done with ISAC. And so this does take a little bit of time. So it's about 2 to 3 hours long. And that's because we take every single benchmark that they chose, and we place it in a grade level. And we ask them, by the end of what grade level would you like this to happen? And so that's why it takes a little bit of time. But after that means that they have a completed framework and it's ready to go. And from there, then they could start implementation if they're ready. So with implementation, we do offer support meetings for them. These are they do have presentations, but these are often sometimes more informal conversations that I've had with schools that I come in, I talk to them and their team about where they're at in this process. And it's understanding, okay, how do you complete these worksheets? Why are you completing these worksheets as well? And what are you finding from your answers? What are you finding and how are you assessing your data if you don't have data for something? And how are you measuring that? And so we do this whether a school has an Illinois PaCE framework at a high school, at a middle school, or if they have a customized framework, we do it for both. So we do have a half-day training that we provide for free to all over the state and for counselors and administrators and employers if they choose to join us on how to understand the really in-depth process of implementation and what that looks like for their school. And so we have a couple activities that we do with them, and we share best practices that we've seen from other schools and things that other schools that join us could implement in their own school if that's their choice. But we do those, and so we do have a couple half-day trainings scheduled for later this fall and in the spring that we'll have them as well. So I'm going to talk about our e-messaging system in a minute, but know that from this, what's going to happen is that this is available for schools. We do have the First Generation Scholars Network. So as you work with students, and when we say students, this is not just high school students. Like if you work with students who are adult learners, or maybe they're enrolled in community college, but they are, they're 23, they're 24. These students can join this program. So this is free for students to join, and it's for first gen students. So I am first gen. And so they can join us to get connected with someone who's a first gen mentor and help get additional transition into college. So while yes, this is geared towards high school students, it doesn't mean that freshmen at community colleges or four-year institutions also could not join. It means that they can, and they can get that additional support as they move through their transition from high school into college, and then as they persist through college. So that is my email that you see on the screen, as well my team oversees, which is the ISAC.PaCE at illinois.gov. And so that is where we will get a lot of the requests that come through. You can send that to ISAC.PaCE or my email. We also have our e-messaging system, which is our version of a listserv. And this is where we announce registration opening for things, when we announce what's happening with the MAP grant or any trainings that are happening across the state. And we do that. But don't think it's like, oh, you get something every day or every week. We maybe send stuff once a month, maybe twice a month. So it's not your typical listserv, but it's free to join, and we encourage folks to sign up and to what applies to them. So I thank you so much for letting me listen to me ramble for the last hour. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if there are any questions and whatnot from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. We appreciate the information. I'll go ahead and turn my camera back on as well. I don't see any questions right now, but while we're giving the attendees a chance to answer or to ask any questions, excuse me, if you are an attendee and you would like to ask a question live and speak freely, please feel free to raise your Zoom hand. You can locate that on the Zoom toolbar, and I can unmute you. So if you would like to do that, please feel free to do so. I also wanted to just draw your attention to the fact that I did put the PDF slide deck in the chat that Megan provided. So if you would like to download that, you can do so now, as well as it will be up on our website. And tomorrow you'll receive the follow-up email, which will have that website in it. So you'll have access to that as well as the recording. And then also I wanted to go ahead and put the follow-up survey for today's webinar in the chat. I know for me, I like to if I'm going to take a follow-up survey, it's going to be right after the session. I'm not going to do it tomorrow or something. So I always like to do that as a best practice in case any of our attendees also feel the same. I know things can light on fire in our workday pretty frequently. So wanted to put that there in case you have the time right now to go ahead and take it. I don't see any questions or comments coming through. We'll give everyone a couple more seconds though. But I just wanted to go ahead and thank Megan for providing this presentation to the system. Like I said, it was born out of one of our follow-up surveys. So on the follow-up survey, if you take it today, there is a question where we ask, what future Workforce Wednesday webinar presentation topics would you like to hear, or what is the system need for professional development? And someone did request a session on this topic. So we were happy to provide that for them. And we just thank Megan for donating her time to the WEO system in order to do that. And we hope that those of you who were on today enjoyed the presentation and found it valuable information to learn about the PaCE framework. And then also, hopefully, if you did find it relevant to your work, you can share it on to some of your coworkers as well. That's the beauty of 2023. Everything's recorded now, right?
Yeah. Yes. You have my email, everyone on the call. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer them. And if I can, I'm happy to direct you who can and do those partnerships as well. But thank you for having me.
Great. Yeah, I don't see any questions coming through. So thank you so much, Megan, for your time. And we'll end early today. I hope the rest of you have a great Wednesday. And thank you for attending.